I'd like to have a moment of silence, please, for John D. Bryson Jr. He passed away on August 19th after an intense battle with leukemia. The services were held Saturday, August 27th. John joined Waco Rotary in 2005 and became a Paul Harris Fellow in 2015. All right, Larry.
All right, it's right here.
Here he is.
That was the flag, everybody. Let's do our national anthem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose what stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. For the ramparts we watched was so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red wave of bursting air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, sing us that star-spangled banner yet wave, for the land of the free and the home of the brave. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mary with our invocation.
An invocation is a traditional prayer for the support, counsel, or indulgence of an almighty power upon the works of a body of people, such as our Rotary Club. So today I offer this prayer. Let us bow our heads. Lord of the universe, you have given most of mankind a strong desire to do good, to be honest, to serve others, and to faithfully fulfill their obligations to their neighbors. Help us as Rotarians and humans to do good. Help us as Rotarians and humans to be honest and ethical in all our dealings. Help us as Rotarians and humans to serve others. And help us as Rotarians and humans to faithfully fulfill our obligation as neighbors to our community, our nation, and the world. Amen. You all may be seated. We have a dual couple with us today, Austin and Dylan Smith. I have them down as guests of Rotary, but they are also our newest members of Rotary.
Thank you, Rosemary. And now with our introduction of our Midway High School students, Susan Baylor.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. It's my pleasure to welcome our student guests from Midway High School today. But first, I'd like to introduce their administrators. Nicole Miles is the College and Career Advisor at Midway High School. Principal Allison Smith, and Superintendent of Schools Dr. George Kazanis. Today, I'm pleased to introduce to you Yulisa. Yulisa, you stand by me. Her mother is Maria Chacon. She's involved in PALS, AVID, and National Honor Society. She has volunteered at the Waco Winter Wonderland and various other community opportunities. Yulisa, would you tell us about your future plans?
I am going to Tarleton for fall 2023 studying free pharmacy, and I'm working on scholarships from FFA for fellowship for my junior and senior year.
Chucky Castillo Jr. is also from Midway High School. His parents are Delia and Chucky Castillo. Chucky is involved in football, theater, AVID, and esports, which he's going to tell us a little bit about in a moment. And he's also involved in helping with Special Olympics. Chucky, tell us about your future plans and esports.
So right now, my future plans are probably involved
called esports. And what esports is basically like video games, and it's like a club that we created. We created it last year. It was one of my friends, his name is Gabe. He created it, and then he told me to join it, and we play this game. It's called Waco Rotary. And it's basically like car soccer, so you just like score to each other's goals and then defend. It's a pretty fun game. Last year we went all the way to state, and we were a runner-up because we lost by 1 goal, sadly. But this year, I think we're going to make a turn. Let's go to state.
Thank you, Susie. And now I'd like to start with the service update.
Good afternoon, Rotarians. I came to y'all a couple of weeks ago talking about the 5810 project by Baylor, where we're going to be packing some food. About 23, 24 people have signed up so far. If you are interested in helping us pack some food, this is the 13th, next week, September 13th, from 4 to 5. You can bring your kids with you to help as well. So we have a couple of those. So come join us. Come see me, send an email, and let me know that you're interested in participating. It's going to be a lot of fun. The goal is to pack 100,000 meals in 3 hours. So come help us do that.
Thank you, Mike. I'm looking forward to that project. I'll be there, and hopefully my kids will too. And right after we have that service project, next Tuesday, the 13th, we're going to have another social down at Slow Rise on the river. Did that a couple months ago. Had a really good time, really good venue, really good participation. So we're going to do that again. So if you'll come out and participate in our service project from 4 to 5, and then we'll go down to Slow Rise on the river and have a social from 5 to 7. That's on next Tuesday, September 13th. You'll get an email probably today or tomorrow about that. So if you'll RSVP, the club will buy you some pizza, you'll buy your drinks, and we'll have a really good time. And also, we have a really weird schedule this month. The Baylor Club is closed at our next meeting date. So our normal third Tuesday meeting is getting moved to the fourth Tuesday. It'll be September 27th will be our next meeting. And now for our chair of the day, Bill Deeds.
Thanks, Bill. It is my distinct honor and privilege today to introduce to you Dr. Richard Russell. Richard is an English professor and director of graduate studies at Baylor University with a particular interest in modern and contemporary British and Irish literature and Southern literature. He has written about poets and poetry to significant acclaim. Notably, he was a Rotary International Ambassadorial Scholar at the University of Glasgow in 1994 and 95. He received his PhD from the University of North Carolina, MA from the University of North Carolina as well, Master in Philosophy from the University of Glasgow, and his BA he got from the University of Memphis, where he and Judge Vic were fraternity brothers. So maybe Judge Vic can tell us some stories later. He has written far too many well-reviewed books and articles and been the recipient of far too many prestigious awards and honors for me to recite them all. However, what I did do to find out a little more about him, I wanted to know what he was really like, so I looked him up on RateMyProfessor.com, a website where students can rate their professors for the benefit of students deciding what classes they're going to take. Richard seems to be a very well-liked professor, although I did find more than one complaint about the difficulty of his classes. So cute, exclaims one student who gives him the highest rating of 5.0. The sweetest man ever, says another. So overall, excellent reviews. Congratulations, Richard, on this. Richard was recommended as a speaker by Eddie Morrison, so I talked with Eddie about any suggestions he might have, and I asked him how he found out that Richard was both a Rotary International Ambassadorial Scholar and such an accomplished author and scholar. Eddie reminded me how much we learn about one another when we're fellow adults together on Boy Scout campouts. There are several of you here today that have shared that experience also. It's kind of a secret benefit of being an adult leader in scouting. Richard and I both have sons in Troop 308, and it's amazing the friendships you make with other adult leaders. The stock market has been a little challenging recently, so I thought I might try my hand at poetry instead. Since we have such a highly regarded expert with us here today, I'm hoping for some professional feedback. Here's a limerick I penned in honor of this occasion. Richard and Eddie camped out, and they talked and found many things out. Like Richard writes books, and Eddie, he cooks. And then they wrote past, "Where's the scouts?" That's very typical of how we're going to with no further ado, Dr. Richard Russell.
I'm going to try to speak without a mic today, so if I'm not projecting, just let me know. I usually don't have a problem with that. If you can't hear, just raise your hand and I'll move to the mic or I'll speak louder. So Memphis has been on my mind lately, unfortunately with the terrible news I heard this morning, the Baylor alumna who was killed. My sister lives right down the street from there. And seeing Vic today has brought back a lot of fond memories of Memphis. So I want to take you back in time to 1993 when I was a mere 21-year-old and was trying to decide what to do with the rest of my life. And I thought I wanted to go to graduate school, but also thought a lot about law school. I don't know if Judge Vic remembers this or not, but I applied to some places that were starting to apply. And then I took one of those prep master courses, and my scores went down precipitously by the end of the weekend. So I was devastated. I thought maybe the law's not for me. Maybe I'll go to Plan B, which is English graduate school, which is always a great way to get a job. Not really. So I had my heart set on going abroad. I found out about the Rotary program from various people in my hometown of Paris, Tennessee, which is the home of the world's largest fish fry, the giant plastic catfish. I didn't bring any visual aids today, but if you ever go to Paris, you can't miss the catfish. I was not selected that summer. I was first runner-up. And once again, I was sort of devastated and crushed. I thought, what am I going to do with my life? And then I got a call in December of 1993 from the Rotary chair in Nashville, Tennessee. And at the time, I'm not sure how much has changed, but you could apply from your home district, and mine for Paris would have been Nashville, or your college district, and mine would have been Memphis. So he called, said one of the winners had gotten a multi-year fellowship to Cambridge, a Marshall Scholarship. Would I still be interested? Absolutely, I was still interested. So I kind of scrambled around. I'm still working on English, and you have to be proficient in the country where you're going to study. So I thought, let's keep it to English language-speaking countries. And some of the schools have already, they had an allotment every year. And again, I'm not quite sure how it works now. But a lot of the schools I considered had an allotment. The University of Glasgow in Scotland is not. And so I thought, all right, let's go for that. I knew very little about Scotland. I know a lot more now. I do have some Scottish props for Rotary clubs, which I'll pass around shortly. But I got in there, and off I went in the fall of 1994. It seems hard to believe, 28 years ago. It was a wonderful year in every way. And in case you don't know about the Rotary Ambassadorial Program, back then what you had to do was you had to speak and sort of be a cultural ambassador for your state. So I would go, and I did throughout the year, to Rotary meetings, and I sort of sang for my supper. And I talked about Tennessee culture, history, literature, politics. Mentioned some of the 95 counties I had to memorize with all the county seats, back in 7th grade history. All that sort of stuff. So I had a host who was from Kilwinning, and so this is the Kilwinning banner. I'm happy to pass this around. It happens to be in Baylor colors, so you can see the green and gold. And it was just a wonderful year. Now, I didn't get to know my host family as well as I would have liked to, but I had a great group of friends that year. I'll come back to them. But Rotary, I was so privileged to be on that Rotary Fellowship that year, because what Rotary did was they paid for me to have a year-long study in modern British and Irish literature. So the year was a turning point for me in a lot of ways. And one of those was that I decided, hey, this is really what I want to do for the rest of my life. Now, there were supposed to be multiple people on my course of study. We showed up, they don't start till October, which is great, because it's extended summer break. And we showed up, it was me and one other guy. Sort of looked at each other, all right, I guess we'll get to know each other. And we did. And so what we had was a number of tutorials with professors at the University of Glasgow. But it was only like every couple of weeks. And so I was studying, but I was also traveling. I wanted to see every inch of Scotland that I could. I got to most places. I'll tell you about my trip to Shetland later. But it was a wonderful fall. And then, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Britain or Scotland or Ireland in the wintertime. It starts getting dark about 3 in the afternoon. And there's something to be said for seasonal affective disorder, right, at that time of year. So we're getting about 6 hours of sunlight. I said, I've got to go back to Tennessee. I've got to get some sunshine. So I came back. Now, when I got back in the spring, I showed up to my first tutorial, and my course convener looked at me and said, I think I can say this here. He said, Dan, this was the other guy, Dan's gone off to London to model underwear. All right. He said, it's just you and me. I said, all right. So we got to know each other even better. Now, that spring was when I first read James Joyce's Ulysses. It's the 100th year anniversary when the novel was published. I won't bore you with all the details, but it's 100 years, and I was actually in Ireland this summer, and still thinking about that initial encounter with Ulysses, which is loosely based on the events of the Odyssey in when I was there in 1994, 95. Getting to study Ulysses that year with a tutor who would also show me Simpsons episodes randomly was a turning point. And when I went to North Carolina after that, I worked with a man who was a world expert on Irish literature who just passed away last year. Now, as I said, I would go around from club to club, and I'll just hand out, these are really nice. I don't know if y'all do this over here, maybe you do. But I'll pass a few more of these out. This is the Shetland one, which I'll come back to. That's another one. But they have all sorts of Scottish traditions. So just as I was sharing my culture, my American culture, my Tennessee culture with them, they were sharing their Scottish culture with me. And one of the highlights I remember now was the Burns Supper in January. Now, has anyone in here ever been to a supper about Robert Burns? So, also spent time in Scotland. Yeah, so it's very much a Scottish tradition. They actually pipe in the haggis. And I won't tell you what's in the haggis, but it's lots of innards and things like that, really. I won't go into more detail, but they have potatoes, neeps, turnips, and they have pork on the thing. It's a big production. So it's kind of one of their cultural highlights for the year. So that was one of many highlights. This is one more banner I'll show you before I tell you my Shetland story. This is a gorgeous one. I think they must hand knit. But every club I went to, and I didn't know a lot about Rotary at the time, I learned more. And I will say, you're to be commended for all that you do. It's a tremendous club, internationally, as you know. But everybody was very gracious, very warm, very inviting. And then sometime during that year, I like to fish. And too bad Dr. Morrison's not here because we've gotten to fish together a lot over the years. And I said, I just really want to go to the Shetland Islands. I just wanted to see the Shetlands, also wanted to fish the Shetlands. So I convinced them that I needed to go to the Shetlands. So, if you ever go to the Shetlands, probably you should fly. Because I got on the ferry in Aberdeen. This was in the spring of 1995. And I noticed everybody was on the floor. They were just lying randomly on the floor, or they were kind of tucked in under a bench or something. I thought, what's wrong with these people? Then we started going. And if you've ever been on a ferry in the North Sea, I mean, I was terrified. And that's why they were on the floor, because everyone was going to get seasick. So 9 hours of this. Just up and down, up and down. And finally we had sort of a break in the way at the Orkney Islands, and we got to the Shetlands. The Shetlands were amazing. It was everything I had hoped and thought it would be. My host said, I hear you like fish. I said, yes, sir. He said, let's go out in the morning. We haven't had much rain around here lately, but we've had a little bit the last few weeks. And we went out in driving rain that morning with just a little spoon and a hook. We caught our limit of brown trout in 20 minutes. Went home, cooked them up, and ate them. It was the best meal I had the whole year. So, if anyone's ever seen the series Shetlands, you have Amazon Prime or BritBox, one of those, it's a tremendous series. It's a very, very isolated part of the world. And even for Scotland, it's isolated. It's about halfway between Edinburgh and Norway. So there's a strange sort of dialect there that's spoken that's part Norwegian and part English, part Scottish. It's another world. So that was another highlight from that year. This is my Shetland banner. Looks very Viking, as you can imagine. And I will say I'm going to talk about something else towards the end of my time, and that's my recent involvement with the Rotary Club in San Antonio in Northern Ireland in reconciliation. But just to finish up talking about my year in Glasgow, by the time you finish that year, I was just telling a couple of folks at my table, you have to sit 3 days of exams. So that was kind of nerve-wracking. So I don't know if you have to do this. My kids have to take sort of comprehensives at the end of their semester in their school. But everything I wrote on those 3 days, and I passed. I should have stayed back to finish the thesis, but I didn't. And I went on to graduate school at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I think we're both Tar Heel basketball fans, so we almost got there this spring.
And Baylor.
And Baylor. I mean, it's a great time to be a fan of both, right? Too bad we had to play each other, right? This spring, that was a sickening game in every way. At least my train of thought. But thinking about basketball. But anyway, I set my exams, came back, but then I had to finish that thesis my first semester of graduate school back in the States. So word of the wise, don't do that. It took a whole lot of time. It wasn't that fun. I actually had the privilege of getting to go back the next year, 1996, and to get that degree. So it was a wonderful year. It was a turning point for me in lots of ways. I told you about one of those turning points. It was kind of something that I wanted to study Irish literature. Another one is that I was brought back to my Christian faith that year, and I was in with a great group of students and faculty called the Navigators. They did a lot of scripture memory work, and I was in a great church called the Church of Scotland. So that was a wonderful year in all sorts of ways. I'll be forever grateful to Rotary for having me as an ambassadorial scholar that year. And now, by the time I have left, I think I've got about 5-ish minutes or so left, maybe 10. So just let me know. Plenty of time. Okay. So more recently, I've been involved with a community that has now become near and dear to the San Antonio Club's heart. It is called Corrymeela. I like what Corrymeela does so much that I've named my ranch in southern Limestone County after it. So there's also, it's hard to get an LLC in the state. I tried to get triple R, R2, all that was taken. So Corrymeela, there were no Irish names of branches in Texas. It worked out well. Let me just tell you about Corrymeela, and I want to tell you about what the San Antonio Club's doing, and then I want to kind of offer a friendly challenge or an invitation to y'all. Corrymeela is a center for reconciliation in Northern Ireland on the northern coast, and it was started in 1965 by a Presbyterian clergyman named Ray Davey. Before I went over there in 2012 for a 3-week-long kind of immersion in reconciliation and conflict management, for lack of a better term, I gave a talk on Ireland and Presbyterianism down at First Pres, and a man stood up at the end of my talk and started talking in a Northern Irish accent. I thought, who is this guy? It actually turns out he was the founder's nephew, Stephen Davey. And I don't know if any of you ever knew Stephen Davey. He was a lovely man. He was married to a former nun. So miracles can happen, right? There was an odd confluence that brought Stephen and I together. And that summer, this was a Lilly Foundation grant. Christian faculty from all over the country went to Corrymeela, and we met former terrorists. And we talked about what it was like after the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed in 1998. We're coming up on the 25th anniversary of it. Strikingly, all the terrorists, well, let me put it this way, none of the terrorists expressed any remorse for what they had done, except for one man. That one man is the subject of a wonderful movie full of movie recommendations today I can commend to you. It's called 5 Minutes of Heaven with Liam Neeson. And it's the story of a young Protestant man who was raised, sadly, to hate Catholics. He actually killed a young Catholic teenager and went to jail for it. He's since gotten out of prison, and he spent his life trying to sort of atone for what he did. Now, we met a number of people that summer, and again, all of them said things like this: I have no remorse, there was a war on, but I don't want my children to do that. We met a guy who was a bomber for the IRA, but skin grafts all over his face. He had some trouble with some of his bombs. But Corey Mila, what they do now, when it was founded in 1965, it was going to be a center for reconciliation, for opposing this conflict all over the world. Then the troubles broke out in Northern Ireland in the late 1960s. And now they realize, oh, we're on the ground right here. So sadly, every summer they still take school children from Northern Ireland up to Corey Mila to get them out of the city. Now, why are they getting out of the city? Well, they have parades. There's a lot of history here. I won't get into the weeds with you, but there are a lot of parades. There's a lot of conflict every summer, about 1,500 parades or so. It's a very public series of spectacles and events. And a lot of teenagers are easily recruited into violence over there, against one side or the other. And when I say one side or the other, what you still have in Northern Ireland, what Corey Mila is working to do, and what the San Antonio Club is working to do by raising now scholarship money to send college students to Corey Mila every summer from San Antonio, is they're trying to break down the literal walls and metaphorical walls that exist in Northern Ireland. What you have, especially if you're working class in Northern Ireland, is almost an homogenous population. So my wife and kids and I walked about 6.5 miles one day in Belfast this summer, and I'm just kind of showing them all this. If you grow up Catholic in a working class area, you're probably not going to see someone from the so-called other side, Protestants, until you get to university. And you may well not be going to university. You go to church with everyone from your neighborhood, and the schooling is almost completely segregated by Catholicism or Protestantism. It just sounds crazy, especially in 2022, but that's how it is. Now, one of the oddities of Northern Ireland conflict is that since the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, there are peace walls that have sprung up. They've proliferated throughout the province. The largest one is, I think, half a mile long, but they separate these communities that throw Molotov cocktails at each other sometimes. Crazy stuff you wouldn't imagine. So, again, one of the big ironies of the conflict is that the peace walls have sprung up. Well, what do they do? Well, they actually divide farther these communities, but a lot of residents have asked for them to protect themselves. So some good things are happening. I don't want to give the wrong impression of Northern Ireland. There's not, open warfare on the streets. There's no more British tanks in the street like I saw even when I was there in 2001. But I love what Corey Mila does. I'd urge you to look it up if you have a chance. It's CORRYMEELA. It's Irish for lumpy place. It can also mean a hill. It can mean a place of hard conversations. And there's people on the ground who are doing the hard work of conflict resolution in Northern Ireland, which has ramifications for the rest of the world. And so, here's my friendly challenge in closing. And so maybe this is too audacious, it's too bold, but I got to know San Antonio Club members, some of them. I've got a friend down there who loves Irish poetry, so he's sent me down there to talk about Irish poetry. I didn't know he was a Rotarian, but of course Jack's a Rotarian, very connected. And again, they raised a lot of scholarship money this past year to send San Antonio students to Corey Mila. And I think it would be a great idea, and I'm speaking out of my complete ignorance of the Waco Club. I know it's a great club. I have several friends here, more than I do, who are Rotarians. But it would be a great idea, and I just want to put myself out there as a volunteer, as a point person. If y'all are interested in trying to do something like that, to send college students, I think even high school students, to Corey Mila in the summer down the road. I would love to be a point person. I'd love to liaise with the San Antonio Club. I think they're the largest Rotary club in the world. They used to be. Someone told me that. Very Texas thing, right? So that's just an opportunity. It's kind of been on my heart. So if you're interested at all, I suppose get in touch with me. But I think that's all I have. I wanted to talk about those two sort of points of contact with Rotary that have been in my life, for which I'm very thankful and grateful. And if we do have a little more time, 5 minutes or so for questions. Yeah. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned the schools were segregated by denomination. Are those public schools or are they all parochial schools?
Okay. So the parochial schools are all Catholic, and then the public schools, the state schools, are all Protestant, with very, very few exceptions. We're talking about 95% segregated schools. It's just bizarre. And there are a few so-called mixed schools. But again, talking about areas where people on both sides have sort of a narrative of being attacked over time. So if you're sending your kids to what's perceived as a all-Catholic school or all-Protestant school, they could well be, there could be comments made, there could be worse things. But that's one thing they really need on the ground is more so-called mixed schools, just people from both sides, as it were. Yeah, good question. Other questions, comments?
Are politics split based on religion there?
They are. Yeah, so I can talk about that briefly. This is kind of an alphabet soup, but in the 90s, sort of more kind of center-right and left-center parties were the dominant parties in Northern Ireland. And it was the Ulster Unionists, which is linked with Protestants, for lack of a better term, and then the Social Democratic Labour Party, the SDLP, was a Catholic party. Those are the parties that came to the table. You may have heard of John Hume, who passed away recently. He was really one of the movers and shakers. David Trimble. These guys got Nobel Prizes. George Mitchell, if anybody saw when Judge Starr brought him to campus a few years ago. So the majority of the population supported these sort of center-right, center-left parties. Since then, the two dominant parties are far left and far right. So Sinn Féin, fairly far left. They made really inroads in Scotland and even in Ireland generally, and then the DUP, the Democratic Ulster Party. So that, again, it's kind of one of those ironies when I was talking about those peace walls. As there's been peace, in some ways, people have moved farther apart. But there's still that kind of recourse, unfortunately, to faith issues sometimes. Or I wouldn't even say they're faith issues, unfortunately. I hope they're not faith issues, right? Because the Christian faith should bring people together. Yeah, good question. Anybody else? Other questions?
So, when you mentioned Point Village, where they send the children in the summertime, is there an educational program that brings the kids from both sides?
There is.
So that
the
idea is, if you know it's Scott and not that foreign person, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, you know it's a person, then it's less likely to be antagonistic because you know that.
Yeah, he's my plant. We can that's the great way to put it, because what happens, unfortunately, is a lot of people live in the world of abstractions, especially over there. I say a lot of the times we don't know our history well enough in this country. They know their history too well. We get to our hotel in Belfast in June, we look out the window of this modern Hampton Inn, my wife's like, what's that? I'm like, that's King Billy. That's King William. They're getting ready to celebrate with bonfires the relief of the siege of Derry in the Protestant community in 1689. And everybody knows that history. But then they get into abstractions. They get away from the specifics of history, or maybe they use the specifics of history to abstract the other side. But you're exactly right. But when they meet these kids, especially, because that's where the hard work needs to be done, and kind of cultivating these more open attitudes. Then you don't start just abstracting everybody. You actually have a name and face to put together. So there's educational programs a lot in the summer. They're year-round. And there's also a branch in Belfast. And so now they're sending people there from conflict zones all over the world before you meet them, because they've been doing this, for 57 years now. Yeah. Great question. Anybody else? Other thoughts?
You mentioned being a cultural liaison and that you would go and see to Rotaries. What were some of the things that they were interested in learning from you?
They wanted to know about country music. I don't know what it is. The Scots love country music. I grew up, Grand Ole Opry's on the radio all the time. I love all that. But they wanted to know about country music. And they would have Cayleys, Scottish dancing. A lot of times they had country and western collars. So that was a big thing. They were very, very curious about country music in a good way. And I did get to see Garth Brooks when I was there in Aberdeen, of all places. So it was sold out. It's a good man. Yeah. Other questions? Comments? Well, thank y'all so much for listening. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. What an amazing story. So glad to have you here today, and glad to have you part of the Rotary family at large. A couple of reminders. Our meeting next week, or in 2 weeks, is going to be the week after because of the closure of the Baylor Club. So we're going to meet on September 27th and we'll have Ken Noble, who will be here speaking on leadership. I want to re-welcome our guests / new members, Austin and Dylan Smith. Thank y'all for being here today. I want to re-welcome our guests from Midway High School, Alyssa Palacios and Chucky Castillo. Thank y'all for being here today. Good luck on y'all's further education. Don't forget about our service project we have next Tuesday from 4 to 5 at Baylor, and then we'll have our social at Slow Rise on the River at 5 from 5 to 7. All right, that's all we have for the meeting today. If you'll please join me and rise and join me with the four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned?